I've always been fascinated by abandoned places, especially old buildings full of forgotten stories and memories. The idea of exploring the unknown has always seemed thrilling to me. When my friends suggested visiting an old commercial building that had been decommissioned for decades, I didn't hesitate. That building had become a legend in our town. Everyone talked about rumors of disappearances and strange events, but I never really believed in any of it. Until that night, we arrived at the building just before sunset. The broken windows and dirty facade were a warning that no one had set foot there for a long time. The door was ajar, hanging loosely as a silent invitation. We went in and were immediately swallowed by the smell of mold and the darkness of the place. I had my camera ready to document everything. The idea was to take some pictures of the upper floors, where, according to some people, supernatural activities were more frequent. The building had a large abandoned lobby, with pillars that were once imposing but were now covered in dirt and cobwebs. In the middle of the lobby was an elevator. The door was partially open, showing the dark interior. The elevator cab was there, seemingly intact, but it hadn't worked for years. Gustavo, one of my friends, dared me to take a picture of the inside. I accepted the challenge with a smile, trying not to show the growing discomfort I felt while looking at that dark elevator. I positioned the camera, ready to take the shot, and clicked. The flash briefly illuminated the space, revealing the rusted metal walls and the back of the cab, which looked even darker than the rest of the building. When the image appeared on the camera screen, I felt a chill that made my heart stop for a moment. There was something there. In the back of the cab, a silhouette. It was a human figure, but it wasn't clear. It was almost like a solid shadow. It seemed to be looking directly at me, with its head slightly tilted, as if curious. I didn't say anything to my friends at that moment. They were laughing and exploring the lobby, and I tried to convince myself that it could have been just a reflection, a glitch in the image. I decided to take another picture, now trying to focus better on the inside of the elevator. I took a deep breath and snapped the second shot. When the flash lit up the interior, I felt a chill running down my spine. The figure was closer now, more distinct. The face was partially visible, but it wasn't a normal face. It was a dense shadow without details, but with contours suggesting eyes and a smile that wasn't human. Something about that expression seemed to mock my presence there, as if I were being watched by something that didn't want me to be in that place. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but curiosity, or perhaps disbelief, held me back. "Hey, what are you looking at?" Gustavo asked, poking me on the back. I showed him the picture, trying to laugh off my growing fear. But when he saw the image, his face went pale, and he immediately looked towards the elevator's interior. He didn't say anything, just looked at me as if seeking some explanation. An uncomfortable silence settled between us, interrupted by the sound of something moving. It was a low noise, a metallic rustle coming from inside the elevator. Gustavo stepped back, and I felt my whole body shiver. The noise was louder now, like something dragging, something coming from the deep darkness of the cab. The interior of the elevator seemed even darker, as if the darkness was something alive, something that was approaching. "Let's get out of here," Gustavo whispered, and I didn't disagree. As we were about to move away, I heard a high-pitched sound, a loud creak that made the air around us seem to freeze. The elevator door, previously ajar, started to close slowly, as if it had been activated by an invisible force. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the empty lobby, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as if the very air had been sucked out of the place. And then, as the door closed, I saw it. Inside, the figure was closer to the door now. It wasn't just a shadow. It had contours, a human shape, but with wrong proportions, as if it were distorted. And the eyes, those dark eyes, seemed fixed on me, piercing me. The smile I thought I had seen earlier was now evident, and it was a smile of pure malice, something that seemed to revel in our fear. The door closed completely, and the lobby was once again plunged into a terrifying silence. Gustavo and I exchanged a look, and neither of us needed to say anything. We turned and started walking towards the exit, each step echoing far too loudly, as if we were being followed. As we moved away from the elevator, I heard a sound I will never forget. It was a metallic click, like the elevator was moving. But that wasn't possible. The elevator hadn't worked in years. There was no power in the building. I looked back one last time and saw the lights on the panel above the elevator flickering, as if the elevator were going up. That faint light, flickering amidst the darkness, filled me with an indescribable fear. We ran. Gustavo shouted to the others, and everyone rushed to follow us out of the building. The cold night air hit us like a blessing when we got outside, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I still felt that presence, those eyes, as if the figure had followed me to the exit, as if it were still watching us from some broken window of the building. On the way back, I showed the photo to the others. None of us could explain what was there, but everyone felt the same shiver, the same feeling that it shouldn't be real. The figure was there, clearer than before, as if it were getting closer, as if it wanted to come out of those shadows. I never returned to that building. Every time I pass by it, I feel a chill, a sense that something inside is still waiting, something that doesn't belong to this world but once saw me and hasn't forgotten my face. To this day, I avoid abandoned elevators, and at night, I sometimes feel as though I can hear the sound of a metal door closing slowly, and that smile, that cold and lifeless smile, watching me from the shadows. Abandoned buildings have always fascinated me. The idea of exploring places that were once full of life, where people worked, laughed, and lived their routines, but now covered in dust and forgotten, seemed thrilling and, in a way, poetic. That's why I decided to explore an old building on the outskirts of my town. It had been a commercial complex in the 70s but had been abandoned for decades. There was something solemn about that building, an imposing nature that resisted time, but also something dark that seemed to hide behind its broken windows. It was a gray Sunday afternoon when I decided to enter the building. I had heard rumors about it, stories about people hearing things, seeing shadows and feeling presences, but I never paid much attention to those stories. I thought they were just the usual urban folklore to make the place more exciting. And so, armed with a flashlight and a camera, I entered through one of the ajar doors. The lobby was deserted, the air heavy and humid, the smell of mold and rust everywhere. The marble floor, once polished, was dirty and full of marks, as if time had left its scars there. I was determined to explore all the floors. I climbed the creaky stairs, the weak light from my flashlight partially illuminating the steps as the echo of my footsteps resounded through the empty hallways. The sound of the wind blowing through the broken windows created an unsettling noise, a constant whisper that made me look back every few seconds. When I reached the 6th floor, something felt different. The air was colder there, a cold that wasn't just the absence of heat, but something that seemed to penetrate deeply, as if it came from within the walls. I walked down the narrow hallways, passing empty rooms, all identical, until I found a door that was slightly open. A thin beam of sunlight penetrated through a broken window in the hallway, illuminating part of the door and leaving the rest in shadow. I pushed the door open, and it swung slowly with a creak that seemed to cut through the silence of the entire floor. What I saw inside made me stop immediately. It was an empty room, completely empty except for a single office chair in the center. It was an old chair with rusted wheels and torn upholstery in some places. It was facing the wall, as if someone had put someone there as punishment. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I stepped inside, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't control. I couldn't explain it, but that chair in the middle of the room had a presence. It was as if the entire space gravitated around it. The light coming through the broken windows seemed to contour the chair, leaving it in a half-tone, as if it were caught between the world of light and shadows. I approached slowly, each step echoing off the walls, the sound of my shoes contrasting with the oppressive silence of the building. I stood a few centimeters from the chair, my flashlight illuminating its back, and a deep sense of discomfort began to grow inside me. It was as if I were intruding on something private, a scene that should have remained forgotten. I took a deep breath, and with an impulse I couldn't understand, I extended my hand to touch the chair. Before my fingers touched the upholstery, the chair turned on its own. It wasn't a sudden movement but slow, deliberate, as if someone invisible were sitting there and wanted to turn to face me. My body froze. The flashlight fell from my hand, hitting the floor and spinning, casting erratic beams of light across the room as the chair completed its turn. Now it was facing me, and I had the terrifying impression that it was watching me, waiting for some reaction. I felt my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. A low sound echoed through the room, a rustling, as if something were moving through the shadows. I grabbed the flashlight off the floor with trembling hands and pointed it toward the walls of the room, expecting to see some animal or anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. Nothing but the empty walls and the broken windows. I needed to get out of there. I tried to take a step back, but something seemed to hold me to the floor. It was as if the air around me had become denser, heavier, and each movement became a monumental task. The chair, still facing me, seemed to emit a presence of its own, as if the very room were alive, pulsating with an energy I didn't understand. Then I heard it, a soft laugh, faint, almost a whisper. It came from somewhere close but seemed to resonate inside my head, a sound that was more felt than heard. My eyes widened, and I felt adrenaline explode in my body. I turned around and ran for the door without looking back, only feeling the desperate need to get out of that place. The hallways that had seemed narrow before now felt endless, each step of mine resounding like thunder as I ran toward the stairs. The echo of my own footsteps seemed to blend with other sounds, footsteps that weren't mine, as if something or someone was following me closely, sliding through the shadows that surrounded me. I reached the stairs and descended as fast as I could, almost tripping on every step as the sound of my panting breath was the only one I could distinguish. When I finally reached the lobby, a momentary sense of relief washed over me. I was about to leave through the door when something made me look back. At the top of the staircase, standing on the 6th floor, I saw it. The chair. It was there at the entrance to the floor, facing directly at me, as if it had followed me down. The weak light coming in through the windows made the chair's shadow stretch down the hallway, a shadow that seemed to want to reach out to me. Without thinking twice, I pushed the door and ran outside. The cold afternoon air hit my face, and I kept running until I was far enough away not to see the building anymore. My heart was still racing, and the feeling of being watched persisted, as if that presence hadn't stayed behind but had followed me, accompanying every step I took. I never told anyone what happened in that building. The feeling that the chair had a life of its own, a presence that shouldn't exist, is something that still haunts me. Sometimes, when I'm alone at home at night, I think I can hear the sound of rusted wheels turning slowly, and I feel the same shiver I felt that day. I know it was just a chair, but something I can't explain, was there, something that still seems to follow me, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to turn and face me again. Exploring abandoned buildings had always been a hobby for me and my friends. No matter how scary the place might seem, we were always willing to face the unknown, laughing at the danger as if we were invincible. One night, we decided to visit an old abandoned building in the city center. It was a 12-story commercial building, and the stories about it were well known. Inexplicable disappearances, strange sounds at night, and sightings of shadowy figures that no one could identify. But to us, it was all just ghost stories meant to scare off the curious. We arrived at the building around 11 p.m. The facade was worn by time, and the broken windows reflected the streetlight like empty eyes. We entered through the basement, where there was a broken door, and climbed to the ground floor. The interior was dark, and our flashlights were the only source of light in that forgotten place. The air was heavy, dense, laden with the smell of mold and rust, as if every corner of the structure breathed decay. We decided we would climb to the top to try to get a view of the city at night. The main staircase was partially blocked by debris, so Gustavo, one of my friends, suggested we go up using the external fire escape. The idea sounded exciting and dangerous, just the way we liked it. The fire escape was rusty and made an irritating metallic noise with every step. The sensation that the structure could come loose at any moment made us nervous, but also motivated us to keep going. We were all excited, joking, and making jokes to mask our nervousness. The wind was blowing hard around us, creating a continuous sound that felt like a lament. I was almost in the middle of the staircase between Gustavo, who was in front, and Luisa, who was right behind me. Suddenly, when we reached the 6th floor, we heard a sound that made everyone stop. It was a scream, a high-pitched, desperate scream that seemed to come from inside the building, somewhere near us. It was the scream of someone in panic, a sound that made the air around us freeze and my hair stand on end. We looked at each other, trying to find some logical explanation for it. Maybe it was one of our friends trying to prank us, but none of us could smile. The sound was too intense, too visceral to be a joke. Gustavo pointed his flashlight at one of the broken windows that opened into the building. We leaned in, trying to see something through the darkness, but all we saw were shadows. Shadows that seemed to move slowly, as if something was there watching us. Luisa suggested we keep going up, and as terrible as the idea seemed, I agreed. The alternative of going back inside the building seemed even worse. We climbed a few more steps, the sound of the creaking metal growing louder, and then it happened again. Another scream, even closer. It was as if someone was right there, next to us, screaming for help, a voice echoing through the staircase and the building walls. It was such a distressing sound that it made my eyes fill with tears. That voice carried a deep despair that seemed to cling to each of us, a fear that took root in the chest and made any logical thought disappear. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure moved quickly, passing by one of the windows of the building, on the floor just below where we were. A tall, indistinct shadow that moved too fast to be human. I yelled to Gustavo, and he turned, but there was nothing there anymore. Just darkness and the sound of the wind growing louder around us. We decided to go down. No one wanted to reach the top anymore. No one wanted to find out what was happening there. Tension took over, and we began descending the fire escape as fast as we could without risking falling. Each step creaked loudly, and the sound of our footsteps seemed to mix with the echoes of the screams that still seemed to resonate through the building's walls. Suddenly, the structure shook. It was a slight tremor, but enough to make us stop, the metal creaking and swaying slightly. The scream came again, this time so close it seemed to be right behind me. My heart raced, and I looked back, expecting to see something. But there was nothing, just Luisa, with wide eyes and heavy breathing. She was looking at something behind me, her eyes fixed on a point above my head. I slowly turned and saw it. Up there, on the floor above us, there was a figure. It was dark, so dark it seemed to absorb the light from our flashlight. Its arms were too long, its legs thin, and it was standing there, just watching us. I felt desperation take over me, and then I realized that the figure wasn't just standing. It was leaning forward, getting closer to the edge of the staircase, as if it was about to jump. We screamed for Luisa to go down, and we started to run. The staircase shook, the sound of metal echoing as if at any moment it would collapse. The screams didn't stop. They were now coming from all directions, a chorus of desperate voices that seemed to multiply with each second. The wind grew stronger, and it felt like the very structure was alive, trying to swallow us. When we finally reached the ground, we pushed the metal door open and entered the building. The feeling of being inside those walls, away from the fire escape, was an immediate relief. We ran through the lobby, not looking back, until we burst out through the front door and felt the cold night air on our faces. Standing there outside, all panting, we looked up towards the fire escape. There was nothing there. No figure, no movement, just the rusty structure against the night sky. But the screams still echoed in our minds, that feeling of despair, of something that shouldn't exist, something that was trapped there, watching us and screaming for help. We went home in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. None of us spoke about what we had seen, but we knew something was there, something we couldn't explain. Since that night, I have nightmares. I always dream of the fire escape, the sound of creaking metal, and that figure leaning forward, ready to jump. And in the background, the screams that seem to come from inside me, a desperate echo that never leaves me, even when I'm awake. I know something was there, something that wanted us to know it was there, something that was trapped, waiting, wanting to be free. And whenever I hear the sound of creaking metal, I can't help but feel that the figure is still there, watching me, waiting for me to return so it can finally jump and reach me.